Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Ramadan Journey. I am your host Afif Khan, and our guide on this journey is Imam Muhammad al-Asi. He is the author of the Ascendant Quran, and currently we are discussing some subjects related to Volume 6, which represents the tafsir of the first 35 ayat of Surah An-Nisa. We have been talking about the provision to marry, for men to marry 4 wives, and the preconditions that are necessary in order for that to take place. And today we're going to look a little bit more deeply into what kinds of problems this particular license solves in society. And so Imam al-Asi, welcome.
Thank you.
One of the issues that's closely connected to this license to marry 4 wives is this phrase, "Ma malakat aymanukum." Can you go into how it's typically translated, why that's deficient, and in what kinds of circumstances this kind of phrase was used in the Quran, and what kind of women it's really addressing?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen. Rahmatillahi lil Alameen. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi al-mayameen. Yes, the ayah that we've been discussing in the previous programs is still the same ayah at the beginning of Surah An-Nisa. We were saying, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا فَوَاحِدًا. If you fear, in the course of taking care of orphans, if you fear, you meaning society here, the Islamic society, and in particular men in that Islamic society, when the instruments of government show signs of failure. So if you fear in those circumstances, in that case, that you are not able to do justice. Remember at the beginning of the ayah the word qist was used, so that corresponds with governments. The word justice here corresponds with individuals.
In particular to this man who's going to engage with multiple wives.
An attempt to marry on an equal footing and with due respect, and without omitting or neglecting the feelings and the expectations of his first and only wife. So if it happens that the person who wants to embark on trying to take care of orphans by getting married to their mother who is a widow, if there's fear that justice is not going to be done here, then the ayah says فَوَاحِدًا, only one. So we stay with one wife here. Don't go around and try to turn this into an adventure in which injustice is going to be done. Instead of doing good, it's going to end up with calamitous results.
So we're talking about emotional justice, financial justice.
All of the issues of justice combined.
So he has to provide for each of his co-wives equally.
That's right.
Spend time with them equally, and so on and so forth.
That's right. It's a high demand. That's why there's this cautionary note.
And all of their children qualify for his inheritance equally in that same way.
So here we follow that up. The ayah goes, أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. This sentence is translated as, or what your right hands possess. أو مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ.
That's how it's typically translated.
That's how it's typically translated. And then it goes on from there to mean that women are considered in certain cases in society to be a man's right-hand possession. There's a very loose concept of that could include like maids and servants and these types of things, or this type of lower class in society. And then there's the more semi-accurate focus on those who are women who used to belong to a non-Islamic society, and because of the nature of an Islamic society, it has a tendency to grow and to expand. And what is involved in this sometimes is the unescapable reality of war. So in this case, there are women in society that have to be integrated, assimilated into society in a very responsible and a very humane way. And the way this is done is through the institution of marriage. مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ is a reference to the responsibilities of a man in a family setting in which he will, provided there's consent, because this is a very critical issue, because some people say, some scholars even say, that a woman may not express her consent to a marriage if she is classified in this category of مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. But that is breaking the law of marriage itself. Marriage, in the Islamic definition of it, is the consent of both sides, husband and wife. And this is not going to be an exception here. So to assimilate them into a normal life, the wording مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ is an honorary description of, because it's the right hand. The right hand in Islamic fiqh is in reference to responsibility and to honor.
Right. We're going to get into that in just a second. Obviously there's more to this explanation. We'll come back in the next segment and talk about what exactly is right-hand responsibility and how it applies to مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. So if you stay tuned, please join us in the next segment.
Welcome Ramadan. Welcome Ramadan.
And welcome back. We're talking about مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. And so if you don't mind, as we begin to get a little bit deeper into this explanation, I'd like you to go into what this right-hand responsibility is. If you could go into what the Islamic discipline is with regard to the right side and the left side. And in addition to that, I'd like you to go back to what some of these Islamic scholars have said. Unfortunately, there's some rather prominent Islamic scholars, and I won't say their names, but they consider مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ to be slave women. So I'd like you to talk about that a little bit. We haven't really talked about slavery yet. We've delayed that to a later program. But you have said that there is no facility within the Islamic guidance with regard to keeping slaves. And so I'd like you to comment on this opinion of some rather important Islamic scholars with regard to مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ.
Well, to clarify this issue a little further, I think we have to be a little more forthcoming in explaining the connotation of the phraseology "ma malakat aymanukum." In Islamic fiqh, things that are done with the right hand are done with honor, dignity, respect, and responsibility. Things that are done with the left hand are things that pertain to toxic issues in life, whether it's the body or whether it is implementing some type of undesirable act. It is mostly attempted with the left hand. So this, in a sense, is not pejorative, like some people have explained it. It is a phrase that gives honor to these women. Now, who are these women? These are women who have been dislocated because of the aftermaths of wars. Wars are a permanent fixture in history. As much as people want to try to say, well, it's terrible, we can't slip this issue under our emotional side.
So if war is a permanent feature of life, then I guess what the Quran is saying, that it lies within the scope of moral rectification.
That's right, and this is part of that. This is part of trying to alleviate the very harsh circumstances that accompany warfare. This can happen in a war that takes place between an Islamic society and a non-Islamic society. If a war takes place between two societies, and those women right now who belong to the non-Islamic society, if that war was lost by that side, then there were men who were responsible for those women. They are wives, they are mothers, they are young ladies, etc. Just the overall picture of women in society. Now, who's going to care for these people? How are you going to take care of people like this? Of course, there's many answers to this, but we're not concerned with man-made answers to a dilemma and a problem like this. We are concerned, how does God help us out in this issue? So the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is guiding us in this is He's saying that the responsibility of these women falls within the scope of a family. A family has to take care of them. So they have to be assimilated into family life in the best possible way, not forced into a family life, and not isolated from the advantages of belonging to family life. As I said, this could happen to women who are not Muslim women as a consequence of a war between an Islamic bloc and a non-Islamic bloc. It could also happen within an Islamic society. Take, for example, in today's world, there are wars that are imposed within Islamic countries. The number of widows resulting from just one example, one sample of what I'm talking about here. The number of widows that have resulted in the very terrible upheaval of the social order in Iraq due to the wars that were ignited by the government there in the 1980s and following that. And then due to the American invasion and occupation of that country, you have about, we are told, 4 million. Iraq's population is around 30 million. You have around 4 million women who have no breadwinners, no supporters, virtually no family life. You have about 8 million or more orphans in that society. So who's going to care for them? Are they going to be left out there in the street to the ravages of the sins and the vices of otherwise immoral behavior under the darkness of night, away from the public eye? Or is there going to be some type of public and social responsibility for them? And so Allah is guiding us. You can only take care of them, offer them the necessity of an emotional shelter as well as a financial refuge in the scope of family life.
Well, there's a lot more to this. We're going to be back after a message from our sponsors. Please stay tuned.
Welcome Ramadan. Welcome Ramadan.
And we're back. We're talking about Ma Malakat Aymanukum in reference to the provision or the license given to men to marry 4 wives. I'd like to ask a question now. In the world that we live in today, we just finished saying that war is a feature of life. And the provision for marrying up to 4 wives is supposed to solve an important problem in society, especially insofar as women refugees of war and orphans. With regard to women refugees of war or women prisoners of war, these women, they're powerless. They're really open to the whims of society, as you had mentioned in the last segment. They're the ones who are most subject to human trafficking. The unattached young women especially are forced into prostitution. Sometimes they're forced to provide sexual services for up to 50 men a day. In this regard, given that this has been a problem throughout history, some Christian theologians, and we cite one St. Augustine of Hippo, he recognized that there's a problem. What are we going to do with these women? And at the same time, he saw his society where prostitution was thriving with these women in that trade. And so he felt that while prostitution is a sin, not having any other solution, he felt at the same time that prostitution is a necessity. And so the question is this, that Islam provides a solution. The Western world, the secular world with its Judeo-Christian background, provides an experience. Is it preferable for women of war to be engaged in prostitution to support themselves, or to be part of a family where this woman of war is perhaps one of the co-wives that belongs to a family where a man is married to multiple wives?
I think the answer to that is self-evident. From an Islamic perspective, it's self-evident, because prostitution and illicit sexual behavior in an Islamic society is anathema. It's something that doesn't and should not exist. I'm not saying that an Islamic society is an angelic society or an idealist society, as much as things like that don't happen. Definitely, even in an Islamic society, with these guidelines that minimize sin, vice, rampant sexual behavior, prostitution, human trafficking, the degradation of the status of women, disrespect for them, using them and once again the issue of power here interplays. We can't emphasize this enough. So in an Islamic social order, these things, if they happen, they are rare, and of course they're not legal. They don't have a license. Like in some non-Islamic society, if prostitution is considered a form of gainful employment. It's just like a job. And if someone wants to practice or become a practitioner of this type of sex, they go get a license for it. They have to take a health exam, and if they pass that health exam, they can offer their services to the other sex.
But even so, in those societies, isn't that profession still considered to be degrading?
I think if human nature is intact, anyone with unpolluted state of nature, feelings and thoughts would find that very offensive, repugnant, and against their very instincts. It cannot go down in any way with a moral person, let's put it that way, of whatever religious persuasion they may have. And I think anyone who would wish to take a survey of this in all the religions of the world and in all of the societies of the world would find that the overwhelming majority of people look at prostitution and look at the sex trade with a very strong sense of revulsion. And Islam is the program from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that fits very carefully and very comfortably with human nature. And therefore this type of thing should not exist in society, and therefore the verses from Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala are guiding us in the best possible way to take care of those who have been victimized by the power construction in society, the orphans and women. And in that regard, to have them feel that they are full human beings with all the rights and all the dignity that is due to them, on par with anyone else who has the most power, at least manifest or material or financial or military power in the world.
This is all very enlightening. I'm sure that many of you agree. But sadly, once again, we are out of time, and we'll have to pick this up again in the next program. We hope that you do join us on the same channel at the same time. I'm your host, Afif Khan, and once again, should you choose to look into this with more detail and with more explanation, please feel free to refer to Volume 6 of the Ascendant Quran. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.